Greetings and welcome to the Center for Contemporary Mysticism. My name is Joe Irwin, and I want to welcome you to another one of our wonderful online programs. Today's program focuses on one of the most significant spiritual figures of the 20th century, a mystic, a theologian, and educator by the name of Howard Thurman. I can remember back in the 70s when I was a student at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, I heard about Howard Thurman and had a real sense of being drawn toward him and his teachings, but I never had a chance to meet him or hear him. And so we're honored today to have as our guest Ms. Arleigh Prelow. She is a person who has spent over 20 years researching the life and spirit and wisdom of Howard Thurman. She's a filmmaker and a minister and is working currently on a film about Howard Thurman and his life. So it's an honor to have her sit down with us. We also owe a debt of gratitude to one of our board members, Ms. Joan Difer. She had the privilege in her earlier years of growing up around Howard Thurman. Her father was a good friend of his, and he would often be in their homes. She called him Uncle Howard, and eventually he even married Joan and her husband Colin. So she brings a unique perspective, and we thank her for making arrangements for us to sit down with Arleigh and talk today. So our conversation will be led by Patricia Pierce, one of our center board members. We're grateful to her for her wonderful work in interviewing, and also we're grateful to Arleigh for taking the time to sit down with us, and we look forward to learning much more about Howard Thurman. I'll turn it over now to Patricia, and we'll welcome Arleigh to the center.
Well, Arleigh, thank you so much for taking time to be with me in this conversation today. I've really been looking forward to talking with you about the project that you're working on regarding Howard Thurman, and also, frankly, learning from you about Howard Thurman, because I think a lot of us have heard his name, kind of know something about him, but may not know a lot of details. And you are someone who's been devoting years into exploring his life and putting together this film, which really looks deeply at his life, his wisdom, his teachings, what made him Howard Thurman. So what was it about him that originally drew you to him, that was so compelling to you about him?
Well, thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to share my experience in working with Thurman and discovering Thurman and learning Thurman and sharing Thurman with the world. I would say that there were two things. There were the words and the experience I felt in first reading him that were both profound experiences. I first heard of him in the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the historic Ebenezer Church. And I'm a native Californian, and I had moved to Atlanta to really pursue my dream of being, at that time we were called television producer, writers, now filmmaker and storyteller, but really to tell stories for Black Americans, a lot of them unknown or needed to be more known. So anyway, I became a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the pastor there, Joseph Roberts, would always quote Howard Thurman. And so there was something, very profound just in quotes that I would hear. And so it led me to want to go read him and just find out who this person was. And I was led, the first book was Meditations of the Heart, a title, and this was in the late 70s, but he had written it, or it was published in 1953. And so I was taken by how, even in that difference in years, these meditations, these short, I guess people would call them devotionals, or would be things that would so seem to articulate what I was going through, or what my spirit was questioning or going through as well. And the other thing was, in the actual reading of the words, I sensed this presence of God in a different way than I had felt in sermons or in just traditional texts. There was just something that's I sensed a God presence as I turned and read these meditations. So it led me to want to even know more about him. I said, so what is this? What brings this kind of sense of God presence in the writing, but also who seems to mirror, his writing seemed to mirror what I was going through. And the one that really captivated me was this Keep Alive the Dream of the Heart, which meditations, as long as a man has a dream in his heart, he cannot lose the significance of living. Yeah. And since that was kind of coinciding with where I was at that time in my life, at the kind of beginning of a dream, starting my dream and making it happen. And it was a sense he was really affirming this deep desire and this kind of vision and dream, the importance of pursuing it and following it. And reminding that it wasn't a folly, it wasn't just some, it was to really do that, because even in pursuing it, there was going to be some significance in not only the achievement, but in the pursuit. And so that was the quote, that was the book, that was the time, and that was the experience that first led me and introduced me to Howard Thurman.
Yeah, so when you say that you encountered something that was unique in his writing, this God presence that you had not really encountered in other sermons and books or whatever, are you able to articulate at all what that was that you were sensing from him that felt different from what you'd experienced before?
It's interesting because it's something, and it's always hard to really articulate, but I always call it like a kind of a tingling within my soul, and I feel it. I call it a prompting of the spirit. I feel it when it's something I need to pay attention to, and it was almost the same tingling that I felt when I felt called to go to Atlanta in the first place, and not having a job or a place to stay, and just going there. And it's something that I felt throughout my life when it's not conventional or conventional wisdom, I guess you might call it, to do these things. Yeah. So that's kind of all I can really say. It's just a kind of a shivering or that kind of
right.
thing.
So something about it was resonating deeply within you.
Right.
And fascinating. Fascinating.
That was
so you
visceral and
yes, that really palpable sense of there's something here. So you started reading his works, and you heard him preach or speak. I don't know if it was
right. I started reading his works. And then around the same time, he published his autobiography called With Head and Heart. And so that was the book that introduced me more into the background, because on the backs of his books would just say, well, he was Dean of Chapel at Boston University. He started the nation's first intercultural, interracial, fellowship and church. So those kind of broad things, but I really, again, wanted to know what, in his experience being from Daytona, Florida, and his background that had him become such a spiritual sage or whatever. And so I had read his book, and so I was really what you might call Thurmanized, and
what a great word.
And so my path in life led me almost back, in a sense, to him, trailing him in a sense. He left, he went to Morehouse and Spelman colleges and taught there. And he also was Dean of Chapel at Howard University. And I had gotten a job after the job in Atlanta in DC. So I was kind of doing, and then after Thurman had left Howard University to start Fellowship Church in San Francisco, he went to San Francisco. So after I left DC, I moved back to San Francisco, to the Bay Area. And it was maybe about a couple of months after I returned to the Bay Area, because I went to UC Berkeley there, so I was familiar with it. But a couple of months after I got there, I saw that he was preaching at Fellowship Church. It was the anniversary of its founding. And so by then, again, I was ready to hear and see him in person. You know, it was so, you know, read him on page, saw these pictures, knew his life a little bit. So that's when I went to hear him preach at Fellowship Church. So the way they set up, he preached in the morning, and then I sat maybe a couple of pews from where he stood, and that same, I call it that same tingling in that power. Yeah. I felt in reading him, I felt in his presence. And he was, I guess he was in his late 70s then, and he was talking very slow. And now I'm, you know, after hearing him, you know, and speaking to people, that was basically his thing. And so after the sermon, after the service, someone announced from the back, Howard Thurman's going to be downstairs. If you guys want to, you know, meet him, you can go downstairs. And so, yes, I went downstairs, and he was standing in front of a table of his books. And I always hit myself because I said, I didn't think enough to bring a book, nor did I buy a book, you know, there. So I stood in this long line to wait to meet him. And so I got up to him, and it seemed like eternity, but Howard Thurman, I'm so happy to meet you, you know, and I was so excited. He was so taken, you know, like shocked, like, I don't know what this, you know, she's a little too excited here.
she's a groupie.
But I was much more taken by his humility, and he kind of leaned down and he said, why, thank you, you know, and he shook my hand. And it's funny because I thought he was like, you know, 6 feet something, and then looking at his records and you know, his you know, statistics, his you know, he was 5'7", so he really, you know, and I'm 5'2", so maybe that had, but I just thought he was just the tallest person in the world. And I laughed because it's almost like he didn't know that I would be tracing his life, or we both didn't know at that time.
Yeah, right. That you would be doing this deep dive into his life, his teachings.
Right.
Yeah.
His birth home and his home where he lived, San Francisco.
So you said that you were interested in finding, well, first of all, let me just say that Howard Thurman has had an influence on America that probably a lot of people are completely unaware of. And that he mentored many people in the civil rights movement, including Martin Luther King, that they looked to him as you say, a spiritual sage, as a mentor. And so I just want to put that out there, first of all, that who he was and what he conveyed has shaped us all and our society in ways that we may not even know about. And so I'm just so glad that you are bringing his life to light so that more of us can really appreciate who he was.
Right.
And you said just a moment ago that as you started to read his works and find out more about him, you were very curious about what experiences or what had shaped him. What were some of the influences and some of the things in his background that you think really were pivotal in his formation?
Right. But before I go there, I want to, and I always want to stress that Thurman's influence was much broader and deeper than the civil rights movement leaders. And I say that because I don't want him pigeonholed as that was the only group of people. He had a reputation for a much broader thing even before the movement. And so the film basically goes there. And so, yes, I just want to kind of put that out there in front before we go too deep and people will just say, oh, King and leaders of the civil rights movement. And, he was just there for the Black folk kind of thing. And so,
because Eleanor Roosevelt also looked to him,
right?
And he was also, as you mentioned, he helped found this an intentionally interracial community and faith community in San Francisco. So he really formed bridges across a lot of demographic divisions, I guess we might say, when we look at racial divisions and stuff, that he was very much about, it seemed, from what I know of him, he had a spirit of out of which could come a deep reconciliation and an awareness of our oneness, of our unity.
Right. So that was essentially, something, but this whole thing of, if I go deep into who I am at its core, I'll come up inside of you as well. And so those are the things that bring people together and reconcile us, kind of recognizing our oneness in humanity and connectedness with all of living things. So yes, he was there. So good. We can talk more, but you had asked this other question about
the things that influenced him. Mm-hmm.
Right. There was the influence of nature. There was the influence of his grandmother, who was a former slave, and just the environment of racial, segregation and dehumanization and those things, which really called for him to really seek some sense of meaning in life. And it was in nature that he felt this sense of connectedness to all of life, and the sense of nature from his backyard oak tree, which he would go and put his back up against in growing up, and use that as a spot of connecting with God and a spot of meditation. And he felt it a lot because through the storms that would come up, the hurricanes into Daytona, the tree would still stand and withstand all of that, movement and broken limbs. There, the tree would still stand, and he felt some sense of stability, I guess you might call it, or still standing present there, and that would be his spot. And so that tree still stands.
Really?
All these hurricanes and everything.
Wow.
Stands
So
in
the
the
tree
backyard.
So the tree was like a mentor to him.
Right.
Wow.
So, and then as well, there was the Halifax River and the Atlantic Ocean in Daytona Beach. And so both places were places where he would stand and kind of look out at the horizon. And so that picture is pretty much a standard throughout my film of that young black boy in Florida looking out and sensing that there was something larger out there that was for him, but that he was also connected to. Mm-hmm. And he says that his earliest religious experiences came from that sense of nature and looking out. So this kind of sense of being connected and at one and all of that came there. And that was also, those were also the spots, particularly the ocean and nature, where he felt that sense of isolation and from society, and the brutality there. And he was very sensitive, he said. And so that sensitivity got to him. And so that would be the place where he kind of reestablish and recenter and refocus and consider. The grandmother was very important too, Nancy Ambrose, and she came to live with he and his mother after his the man who raised him, Saul Thurman, had died. And so she would teach him and he would read the 139th Psalm to her because she couldn't read. But also she always reminded him and the sisters when they were down that they were God's children. And so that was, children of God, and something that kind of kept him in that sense of relatedness to the divine, and it was her kind of reaffirming that. He often says that, as brilliant and as much knowledgeable, as much as he learned in terms of theology, he learned more from his grandmother than the professors and other people, valuable people that came in the academy to him. But her sense of I call it like God, experiencing God, or just that God mysticism, or just God connectiveness and God presence came a lot from her as well. He was, after she kept him in, his mother kept him in the church. So she said, he would always say his grandmother is a God mystic, his mother was a Jesus mystic.
Wow.
But the grandmother was very influential. And so it kind of kept him on this path. And the other thing was his grandmother was forbidden to learn how to read when she was a slave. And so she always encouraged the value of education and learning, because she thought there was something magical or magic about, or something significant about reading, which is why she thought she was forbidden to do it.
Yeah, right.
So,
exactly.
So that encouraged that kind of intellectual understanding and growth, and going knowledgeable and becoming deeper in understanding the world as well.
And he's referred to sometimes as a mystic theologian. And I think of the mystical sense is that, as you're describing it too, this personal experience, this personal knowing of this being in communion with this greater than oneself reality. And theology is more, it can get very heady and idea oriented, but the mystical sense is the actual experiential part that he certainly brought into everything that he did. He was an amazing preacher.
Right. People would, he was different. And that was the other, I didn't understand that until I started listening to his tapes and actually seeing him preach. People would talk about pauses and that you always felt that you were on the journey with him. And it's almost like his meditations. It wasn't like he was really declaring all these things and you take it, it was kind of, this is a thought, let me explore it, and then come up with something as almost a suggestion for you to consider, as opposed to kind of declarative, you have to think that way. But you end up the way he probably thought that way anyway, but you end up thinking how he starts off. But yes, and his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman, who I got to spend time with in the process in the early days of making this film, would always say he was a frustrated actor, frustrated Shakespearean actor, because he did do that in college as well, his acting. But yes, he was different. And for me, as an African American woman growing up in the church, there's a certain pulpit style that is definitely more vocal and declarative, and he had just a different kind of slow, deliberate way of preaching, but still impactful. You were very just drawn in to his
very work. Powerful.
Yeah, and his voice as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah. More almost in some ways contemplative, and like you're saying, this feeling like this is being created in the moment.
Right.
We are in this process of deliberation and consideration and listening, and really extraordinary.
Yes.
So what would you say came to be the core beliefs or his North Star? What were the core things that really were his anchor in his life and he really sought to live by and live out?
Well, this whole kind of unity unity of all living things and interconnectedness, and we can't fully be who we are if others aren't fully who they are, or the world isn't fully what it is, both in nature or in terms of people. But he was speaking more or less in terms of, when I would hear it in people, but in his life, and you could see where that came from. I think that was probably at the core, but he was also someone one of the scholars says, actualizing your potential, because he really was about people becoming, they have this, popular thing about coming alive, his buttons and Instagram posts and things about what the world needs are those who have come alive. But really about us revering life to that, respecting life, and to the fact that we're going to live it fully and abundantly and with love at the core. His whole thing at Fellowship Church was really about not so much bringing people to sit in the pews together and worship, but kind of building this whole thing based in the love part where there's understanding is at the core of it, and that real fellowship happens when people have knowledge of what he called the facts of who someone is, and understanding who they are, all their particulars and things. And when you have that happening, which is what happens when you're working in love, that's when people really come together. So he was really about bringing together those experiences where people could know more about each other's facts, as they say, or their particulars, and not only in just fellowshipping with one another and being in each other's homes or having programs and things like that, but also in the worship experience. And that was what he was always trying to kind of cultivate, this sense of building this unity, through the worship experience. So it's hard for me to, as it's been for this film, sometimes to just wrap up everything in a nice, pretty bow about Thurman,
right?
Because he was, I wouldn't say all over the place, but he was just broader and more harder to kind of say, this is, what he did, or this is who he influenced her.
Mm-hmm. He was also a pioneer in a lot of ways, a first, stepping into situations and roles and responsibilities and sort of breaking new ground, is my understanding, as an African American. And the San Francisco church was one example of that. Or, I don't know if they refer to it as a church or fellowship.
Right.
But then also his chaplaincy work, and what were some of the times when he himself was moving into new territory?
I you can go back to, which talks about the times when he was a little boy in Daytona. He was the first Black child and to get an 8th grade diploma to graduate from, because they didn't have high schools and people, and so it wasn't a priority for Black children. And so, yes, a principal tutored him, and so he was able to get his 8th grade diploma, and then went away to school to Jacksonville to a private Baptist academy, because there weren't any public schools, high schools, and things for Black children. So it kind of started him on that, he was started on the first, even in his hometown, and going to Rochester Theological Seminary. He was only one of 2 Black students, Black American students in his class that they let in, but he later became president of his class there at the seminary. And then you can kind of skip forward to when he was at Howard University, and they never had a dean of chapel, so he was the first dean of chapel there. And while he was there, he, I hate to say, you don't want to make it sound so casual. Oh, he happened to stop over into India and meet Gandhi. But yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah.
He traveled to India, so he's the first African American to have audience with Gandhi in India and on the pilgrimage. And then he returned to Howard and then again went to San Francisco and co-founded the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples, they called it, with Alfred Fisk. And so started the nation's first intentionally, because some people will say, well, there were integrated congregations before, but this was one where it was intentional, and also that it was intentional in terms of leadership, and that an African American was, at the head, as you might call it, of the congregation, because there were plenty when that, wasn't. And so, right, in multicultural congregations. So that was very intentional in that. And then the BU, the Boston University appointment in 1953. So Dean of Chapel there, and the first African American to hold an administrative dean, I guess they call it, or just a deanship at a predominantly white university. So he did that as well. So those were some of the kind of notable things that are always flagged.
Yeah, he really did get an early start from his childhood. That's really something.
Yeah.
So as you look at his life and the influences and so forth, what would you say the significance was of his meeting with Gandhi and that pilgrimage?
And I'm glad you say that pilgrimage, because it was also much more broader than just going there to meet Gandhi. Gandhi had an assistant who had come to Howard, and Thurman, they met, and so that was definitely part of the itinerary that was being set up in motion. But he was invited there as part of a student Christian movement of India, and at that time was Ceylon and Burma. This is different country names there, but they were in this midst of this I wouldn't call it revolution, but nationalism. They were trying to recoup the country from British rule, and so they invited Thurman and the delegation there as a way to know how they, as African Americans, dealt with their faith, and was it something that they could learn, that they could take in terms of their situation with the British. So they were there to kind of share their stories of faith and experiences as, in faith as Christians with India. So all to say is that the trip was much more broader and so with that trip, there were a couple of key things alongside with the Gandhi thing. One was that he was really starting to, in the experience of other religions, kind of still feeling the sense of the same divine presence. So he could be, in a temple, mosque, or he felt it. He almost likened it to, well, in Daytona, I was in my Baptist church and there was a Methodist church. And when I would go to the Methodist church, I would feel the same God. So it was almost that same kind of sense. There was this sense of divine and all over, it wasn't, just restricted to his faith but really feeling it profoundly. So that was that. And then also he was criticized a lot by some of the groups, students in the groups he was addressing, because they were wondering why he was a Christian, or they were Christians, when Christianity, as they saw it, was really oppressing, or the lynchings that Christians in America were doing, with Black folks. And so
the religion of the oppressor.
Right. So it set him on this realm of in terms of his faith, how he can articulate what is special and meaningful, and what has been special and meaningful for generations of Black people, that even though, others have interpreted the religion in different ways and have used it against them. So it set him on that kind of mind thing, which eventually led to this fellowship church, desire to set a church up like Fellowship Church. And then the conversation with Gandhi, it was kind of like a both thing. Gandhi really wanted to get information from Thurman and Mrs. Thurman about the conditions of African Americans, because he had read, but he just kind of wanted firsthand about education and political and social conditions. And they also wanted to know about his views of Christianity and why it hadn't spread further, and what were those obstacles, in India, but also just about the possibility of the social, nonviolent, social action, how that could be, if he saw that as a possibility for America as well. So they were asking him about that. And mainly, just to kind of backtrack historically, Black Americans were starting to, even before Thurman went over there, to kind of look at Gandhi. They had heard about him and wanted to know, is this a possibility for us? So he was, in a sense, I don't know if you call it a spokesperson, but someone as, to kind of lay that out directly to Gandhi. And Gandhi had mentioned that it would probably be through African Americans that it will come through. That kind of movement would happen in America as well. So
the nonviolent transformation of society.
Right. So he picked up a few things while he was there, not only from the conversation and the nonviolence and direct social action, but also through his individual experience of the divine in different places as well.
And what you're describing about his encountering that divine presence in all these different religions just speaks to who he was in terms of his comprehension of this deep unity, this deep oneness that we all participate in. So coming back or adding more, exploring a little bit more the nonviolent stuff. How did he and Martin Luther King connect, and how did some of those connections happen? And did this experience that he had in India inform some of the things that Martin Luther King later did in his leadership?
Okay, well, bear with me because I always like to clarify and make sure this is King's parents, Alberta and Martin Luther King Sr. and the Thurmans were close friends. Mrs. Thurman went to high school at Spelman with Alberta King, King's mother. So all that's to say, there was a family relationship prior to Martin coming to this earth, So it went a little further down the road. And when Thurman went to BU, Mrs. King told Martin, he was finishing up his dissertation, that he needs to connect with the Thurmans. So it was kind of like that. Though Thurman was a prominent preacher, and there was still kind of that kind of family undergirding. In terms of the Gandhi piece, when Thurman went, it started a trail of other Black prominent educators and religious leaders to also go and meet with Gandhi. So included in that was Benjamin Mays and Mordecai Johnson, who were strongly affiliated with Morehouse College. In fact, Benjamin Mays was president. King goes to Morehouse. And that's where people, scholars seem to feel that that's where some of that early Gandhi possibility was introduced to King. Not so much Thurman directly, but from Mordecai Johnson and Benjamin Mays. So, but at the same time, their relationship, and there was just a high respect between King and Howard Thurman, again, because Thurman at that time was pretty much the man, and I don't call it the man, but a noted preacher and clergyman. But I've since seen or understood that there was a high regard and that King would carry, and read Thurman's books and meditations, and particularly this book, Jesus and the Disinherited, which was kind of forming just before Thurman went to India, but certainly, in the 1940s after he had come back, that, what does the religion of Jesus have to say to those with their backs against the wall? Yeah. And so that was an important book in Martin's space too, as well. I've seen when they were to originally auction off King's mementos, there was a makeshift library that they had, and you could see a lot of Thurman titles in there. And also there was a legal sheet of paper where King wrote the 10 greatest men in the 20th century, and with Gandhi and Albert Schweitzer and others, Thurman's name was on there. So there was quite a reading of and taking it in conversations he had with Thurman about several things, and the movement and just spiritual renewal. When King got stabbed by a woman in Harlem, he asked for Thurman to come down and from Boston and minister to him, and so it was kind of like I said, it was all over the place, but I don't, a lot of times people say, well, he was at BU and he sat under Thurman's, and yes, that's a possibility. I wasn't there, to see it, but it's not as clean and clear cut as he went to God, he saw Gandhi, and then he went and told Martin Luther King, young Martin, you want to carry this forward.
Right. Things rarely evolve that way, right?
Right. In fact, there's another civil rights movement leader that sometimes is overlooked. His name was James Farmer, and he was head of the Congress, what do you call it? CORE, racial equality. I think it's Congress for Racial Equality. He was a student of Thurman's at Howard University in the 40s, and in the late 30s. So when Thurman came back from India, he spoke to his class, and Farmer was in that class, and he told them about the possibilities of that kind of direct, nonviolent movement. So that one is a little more cleaner than King, but since King is the most noted, I imagine that people tend to, go there.
So as you, Arleigh, look at the times that we're in now, what do you think Thurman would want to say to our society at this moment? Or what might his prayer be for us right now?
Well, one of the things, and we talk about in the film a lot, is that Thurman saw the civil rights movement as a spiritual movement, right? Because it was trying to bring wholeness to it. And so for us on either side to kind of remember that's what we're moving toward, is a greater wholeness, because that is God ordained, I guess, for lack of a better word, that do that. So again, that's kind of unity, but this total wholeness, and it doesn't mean being alike or anything, but there's this piece. The other thing he talks about is, in this kind of sense of feeling hopeless or in despair, is that, I guess lesson number 2 is that this God, this divine being, is the God of both darkness and light. And so that is still operating, that is still moving to the ultimate good, and that there's a God presence, the divine presence, even in the midst of this darkness. And that's something that really kind of goes even back to his Daytona, just kind of sensing this. This divine, even in the night, even in the night, God is still present. Looking at the stars, and when you couldn't see anything, sometimes that there was still this God present. So, in terms of just a hope, remembering this hope, and really this, not in a sentimental thing, but love at the core, but almost like this fellowship church thing. At the end, let's not just strive to get people of different colors just in the room together or next door,
right. Just
or
that sort of superficial display that doesn't go deep into relational connection.
Because he says true connection never just comes between just head to head like that. It's again through that kind of going down. So, these discussions that we're talking about, and, we have to have discussions and understanding, unless it's really authentic and people are open to kind of go to those places. Unpleasant to them, unpleasant to others, but just to go to those places, that's where the real coming together happens. I think, that at the core of what we're going for is something much more deeper than just superficial, as we were saying, kind of connecting,
Right.
What we're really on this planet, our only way of surviving is to kind of go deeper into each and one another.
That's beautiful. And to recognize that this is a sacred endeavor that we're undertaking.
Yes.
And it really is, I think, but let me just say that I feel so moved by what you just said that I'm just feeling very moved. And to understand that in that kind of deep connection, we are moving more and more into that awareness of our deep, inherent, intrinsic unity, which is coming to know who we are. Like you said earlier, Thurman talks about when you go deeply into the other person, you come out, you see yourself. I don't know. You said it beautifully. Right. I'm paraphrasing, but that in that kind of deep connection, we discover who we are. It's so much more than. It's important to understand the need for social change, systemic change, and to understand that it's a sacred act. Like, this is a spiritual thing that we're doing. That's such a beautiful reminder.
Yeah.
Really beautiful. Yeah.
Well, this film has
I want to hear. So your film, it sounds like it's not, as you described it to me earlier, it's more than just a straight documentary. Can you kind of give us a flavor of what it is? How you would describe it? It sounds very artistic. But you say it in your words. I'm not going to try to speak for you.
So it has, some of the conventional, things of dogs, like archival footage and interviews and, documents. For me, I always, when I called it the Psalm of Howard Thurman, was not only because of his affinity for the Psalms, and particularly Psalm 139, and his sense of his life embodying that, and his beliefs embodying that psalm. For me, it was also a sense of pulling together a sacred song which the Psalms were, and to have it progress as a song and present it as a song, in the sense that there are these, a big crescendo at the end, and kind of a building up and little interludes in between. So structurally, it's kind of made up into these different movements, which are chapters of his life, and those pivotal moments. I like to focus the film on, I call it the pivotal movements of his soul, in a way, as opposed to kind of a purely kind of factual, informational thing, though you're getting this information and facts. But at the core of it is so where's his soul at this particular place, or where has it been challenged, or what things have moved him to go to this new level and to do there. In a way, it's almost as if the Thurman thing of just going deep inside of him so that he can come up in everyone else. So instead of trying to just kind of just throw things out to engage people, it's just really kind of go into that human experience of Thurman as a way to draw people into the storytelling. And also interwoven are my personal experiences of meeting Thurman and along the way of making the film as well. So it's not about me. And sometimes I kind of, traditionally the filmmaker, is kind of away. And,
right.
But as time has come on, it's definitely, the involvement is much more there, and attachment, I think, is much more there. And maybe it took other people to say, yes, do it, and give me permission to do it. And I think the film has a different kind of a life and meaning with that in it too. But I would say, in a sense, a song, that's my aspiration. So, sometimes conventional documentary tropes, I kind of like, but I'm not feeling, I'm not feeling that.
Yeah. It's sometimes the information, but not the essence, I guess I would say.
Yeah. So the longer I think I've worked on it, the more so what is the meaning of his life? What is for us who watch it? And how will it make our life more meaningful than what didn't know, what was good I learned? You'll get that, but in essence, it's much more what was the meaning of his life for us and as we live our lives now.
And it sounds like you're approaching the home stretch of the project. Is that accurate?
Yes.
You've got,
much. I wouldn't say much more, because we're basically there in terms of the structure of the film. So basically, it's those final touches of getting, I call it a final editor to do it, and we have composed music with the final cues and the final voiceovers and that, and the final monies, as you might call it.
Always that in a creative project.
To finish it up.
And
when we first did it, in the early years, PBS, funded a portion of it with the understanding that they would like to see it or have first considerations. And so that's always been one of the platforms, but we're also looking, and I think it's working so much better, with the streaming capabilities and, streaming venues as well, because it's, I didn't want it to be just limited in terms of who had access to his story. And as well, I think this film, and I believe this film will be not kind of a one-off thing that people can really appreciate just with one viewing, that he's so rich, and the wisdom that he shares is so rich throughout the film that, people, like a good book, you may want to go pick it up again and read it and look at this chapter or whatever. So,
and it's so timely. I mean, I think people are really so hungry for this message and this wisdom and the presence that he was and is.
It's so funny. ever since I've been making this film, it's always been timely. You know, someone said timely,
Yeah.
timeless, but it's particularly these times
It's
that,
particularly
that
yeah.
I said, hey, okay, let's get it going. You know,
Yeah.
and that's the hope that garnish up the support to really pull it, you know, take it and push it out the door.
Yeah.
With the same artistic integrity intact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for people who want to know more about the film or how, you know, where you are with it or about you, what URL should they visit? What website should they visit?
HowardThurmanFilm.com
Okay.
is one. And then we have a Facebook page that is much more up to date.
Okay.
That people, the Psalm of Howard Thurman.
Okay. Which is the name of the film, The Psalm of Howard Thurman. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Great.
That they can go. And if they want to do Twitter, we're there too, and Instagram. So I don't know what your audience.
Right.
But Psalm of Howard Thurman has pages, and so those tend to be much more up to date. And there's a donate button on the website that people would love to help support. And they can also communicate with me through the website as well. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing it.
Oh,
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So I'm going to keep my eye open for it.
Okay.
Well, Arleigh, thank you again so much. It's been a delight to talk with you, and thank you for sharing the depth of your understanding and your insight into who Howard Thurman was. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy that the Center for Contemporary Mysticism found this subject and my talk and insights something of interest. Yeah.
Well, I think it's right up our alley. So thank you again. Okay. And blessings on you and your work.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you especially to Arleigh for taking time to sit down with us and bring to life this amazing spiritual figure in our times. His hope and his words of unity and wisdom are so needed today. So thank you, and we will certainly be looking forward to the film when it is released. Thanks to each of you who have joined us today via technology, and thank you for being a member of our center family and all you do to help us be able to bring these programs to you. So we say thanks, and we wish you God's blessings in the days ahead. We have many more programs coming up, and we'll be back to see you very soon. In the meantime, namaste.